Good morning, all. So welcome to the day 2 of DrupalSouth 2025 in Melbourne. So here we have today the first session under our track Web Tools and Complementary Technologies. So please welcome Rox to the session Building a Versatile Design System for Pacific Data Hub, Bridging Drupal Themes and Headless Frontends. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so I'm Rox. I'm CEO of X=. We have offices in both Melbourne and New Zealand, our New Zealand office being our more established one. I've been here in Melbourne the last 7 or so years now. And yeah, I do all sorts of things, ranging from lots of Drupal, obviously, but also various design and arts projects. And yeah, we recently engaged SPC PDH for this project. The project is for the Pacific Data Hub. I'll just load up this. Yeah. So this is the Pacific Data Hub. This is not utilizing this design system, this page, but it's just to show you who they are. The Pacific Data Hub is a central repository of data about the Pacific for the Pacific. It serves as a gateway to the most comprehensive collection of data and information about the Pacific across key areas, including population stats, fisheries science, climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction and resilience, conservation of plant genetic resources for food security, public health surveillance, and human rights. So it's, yeah, a pretty fantastic resource. Now we should be able to go back to this. Cool. Pacific Community, SPC, needed a design system for the Pacific Data Hub to simplify the creation of their dashboards and portals, of which they have many. There were many challenges involved in this, and it was quite a short turnaround project. There were multiple front-end targets, including traditional Drupal, which they use for a bunch of their dashboards, plus a Next.js Headless implementation, which was a new thing for them to work with Drupal. And they had some accessibility needs that needed improving, and we also needed to have a subset of the components rapidly delivered for one of the portals, which was to be developed headless with Next.js. And that portal is this portal, the Education Research Bank, which has access to all sorts of research data driven with headless Drupal, with all sorts of fun filtering and so on. This is a very quick show of the page. So, very quickly, what is a design system? It's the central source of truth for the UI and UX, for reusability, consistency, and faster dev cycles, and to be used across different teams. So you've got the design team, you may have people working directly with Drupal, other people working in the Next.js versions of things, and they can all access the design system and utilize it in different ways. Big picture, we picked Figma as the design source, in part because PDH was already using Figma, and in part for its capabilities to, in future, integrate with Storybook if we want to. We did some tests on that with some good success. We chose Bootstrap as the CSS framework, largely for the needs of speed, in terms of getting the first project out the door. We wanted something that we could hit the ground with running really quickly and allow us to apply the styles largely via just the DOM. And we utilized Storybook and also a demo site for component previews and docs. And we created a Twig Drupal implementation and a React Next.js implementation. There was a lot going on there. There was a lot to try and achieve in a short period of time. We embraced atomic design principles for the design system, whereby each part of the system is made up of designed elements that are combined. Atoms being the smallest unit of division, and in Drupal they roughly correspond to fields. and some of their parts, such as labels, etc. Followed by molecules, and we essentially treated display modes as molecules in the system, views as organisms, layouts as templates, and then you have your content delivered via layouts to create your pages. Within Figma, for the designs, we used a Figma Bootstrap library as a starting point, and I'll just load this up. I do actually have this open in another tab, so we don't have to wait. So we have a Figma document here laid out with, these were the priority components that needed to be delivered first. We have essentials, we have, sorry, I'm having a little trouble with some of the navigation here. Yeah, here we have the collection of organisms. Molecules, sorry, I should say, and then organisms here, which were the initial pages. And then we have the larger set of all components. It's just a quick show of some of the Figma stuff there. I'll go back to this. So the Drupal side of things, we utilized various contributed modules and themes in putting together what we created. And we started with looking closely at how Drupal handles Bootstrap. So existing Drupal Bootstrap themes have a lot missing at an atomic field level and display mode level. There's not great initial inheritance, so there's a lot of different projects all trying to solve individual parts of the sort of Bootstrap ecosystem. We found that for creating something where people could just, at a dashboard creation sort of end of things as a site builder, being able to just get in and make something and know that whatever you're creating, even if you're adding additional fields and whatnot, that it will apply in a nice way. We had a lot of trouble with finding a Bootstrap theme that would handle all of this, so we ended up pulling in together a whole lot of different parts of different projects and pulling it into one sort of mega Bootstrap theme with loads of Twig files. We used an atomic file structure using single directory components that were then nested within the types of items. So we've got a folder of atoms, folder of molecules, folder of organisms, etc. Each of those directories contains all the possible Twig files for delivering the given component, along with a storybook Twig file, and yeah, anything else that needs any custom CSS it might need, etc. We used a custom Bootstrap compile so we could override a whole bunch of variables as needed, and shared that custom Bootstrap implementation between the two implementations. We set it up so that storybook stories could be generated from Twig files in the Drupal theme. That is something that wasn't utilized to its largest extent for the Drupal side, just because we found that demonstrating the components for the Drupal side in an actual site where people could see how it was put together was more useful for that one. We have a demo site here, which I'll bring up. Now this demo site basically serves as documentation for the design system as being, if you're using it within Drupal. So we have your foundations, so you've got, this is organized with the atomic structure here. So there's information about all the colors, accessibility information, and demonstration of how they can all be applied. There's an accessibility page going over a combination of how Bootstrap handles accessibility, but how it also applies specifically to this design system. There's information here about the templates, including available field groups, view modes, field display modes, block types, content types, paragraph types, how you can extend those templates. So there's examples of a bunch of the templates in here and how you would apply the template logic. We have typography examples. Now all of this gets added via the GUI now that it's in the system, so you can create pages with any of these items on them really easily. Design system had a full set of icons. And there's information around how, if you wanted to, say, manually create a badge in HTML, here's how you might do it, along with other methods you could do it. For the most part, atoms are configured to display where they should on larger items that are being created. Some information about toggles and selects. We'll skip over a few of these. We have various card examples. They had a specialized card type that they needed created with flipping and sliding animation options, and also implementation of modals. All of these done in sort of native Bootstrap way, but all applied for the most part via the theme. So here's an example of where we want things available in multiple ways. So there's information about how you could apply the accordion in all sorts of different ways. So you have accordions as paragraph types. Then you have accordions rendered via a view as view rows. Then you can also do it as field groups, which I don't think we included the live accordion there. And then say something like modals. There's an explanation of how if you basically create something with these fields, you can get it to trigger, and then examples of it being used in different contexts. Essentially what we wanted to do was, for each component in the system, we wanted to try and have it available in as many ways as possible. So if you had, you wanted to create a field group that utilized it, or you want to create a paragraph type that utilized it, or a view that utilized it, or a display mode that utilized it, there should be multiple paths to get to the outcome, because that's something that we were seeing, was that a lot of Drupal Bootstrap themes were very opinionated about how you might have to create the thing if you didn't want to create your own custom templates to go with it. And same with a lot of the modules out there for adding different Bootstrap features, maybe like, if you want your accordion, you have to render it in a view, or you have to do it like this, or you get multiple modules to achieve the different things. So we set out to basically make sure that each component had as many display, like Twig files set up and configuration available with documentation for recreating it in all the different ways that you might need it. There's a list of some of the sources of Twig files. So there was and before we created a whole lot of additional Twig files, we harvested a bunch of Twig files from various places to put together from various open source projects that we found useful. So there was a version of a Drupal X distro theme that was Bootstrap back last year that has since been dropped. And there were a lot of really useful Twig files there. There was a bunch in standard Drupal Bootstrap 5 theme, and then various other. This is sort of a subset of the places. But then obviously we had a whole lot of other ones we had to make. So we sort of tried to collect up examples of how each of these different ways of displaying the things could exist from different projects, bring them in, go over them, make sure that they work, put them into our atomic folder structure, and adjust as needed, and then fill in all the gaps with our own Twig files to get it up to the full extent that we needed for the project. So the Next.js implementation was quite an interesting one. We extended a React Bootstrap NPM library, which had a bunch of components available for Bootstrap, and a React Bootstrap Storybook library as well. We converted all of the components that were available in that to work with Next.js, and created a storybook to go with it all. So this is the documentation source for the Next.js implementation of it using Storybook. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Storybook, but it's basically a way of demonstrating components outside of the system you might build it in, and showing how you could, showing it rendered with the HTML and being able to modify variables to test things out. But each of the items that you saw in the previous demo site are all in here as well. And yeah, then we released, PDH released the output library created from this as a package as well. So that's available, and I think it's got quite a lot of downloads at this point, which is cool. And yeah, it's been pretty good because it's just got a lot of other additional elements of Bootstrap implemented that didn't exist in the React Bootstrap library or the React Bootstrap Storybook library, and has a whole lot of extra options and sort of ease of use elements added. So there's a lot more access points for variables and ways that you can customize the outputs of things like cards, for example. There's a whole bunch of extra inputs to be able to create things like our flipping cards and all that fun stuff. So as far as lessons learned on this, initially we were hoping to create one implementation that could export to both systems using web components, but for the speed we needed to go, we realized that wasn't really going to be achievable, and did the Next.js side first so they could get that dashboard out. Utilizing the shared design framework, though, between the two systems massively speeds things up. So we're just needing to recreate HTML markup between things, and then they look the same, which is fantastic. We did discover that Storybook can add a lot of overhead, but long term, that will pay dividends very, very easily. The overhead in getting it set up, while it was reasonably significant, I think it was well worth it. And the larger part of the overhead there was setting it up for the Drupal side of it, where we haven't actually managed to create stories for everything, but got a lot of the way there and ended up with the demo site for the Drupal side instead. We did realize that if we any diversions from the framework itself can add a lot of double handling, so we had some custom elements like our flip cards and things like that. They ended up taking a lot of the extra time just because we couldn't simply recreate the markup and be like, cool, Bootstrap's handling this. We needed to bring in extra CSS and JavaScript and things for some other parts, and then you'd have to implement that on both sides for how Drupal might want it through a theme versus how Next.js might want it. And we learned that the Drupal Bootstrap landscape has a lot of gaps, which we spent a lot of time trying to fill. It's been utilized in a quickly growing number of PDH projects, such as, click through these. So this was all delivered. The system was delivered late last year, and we've already got multiple projects using it. So they have their education policy bank. These are Next.js driven with a Drupal backend delivered over API. For things like these toggle buttons on the Drupal theme integrated version of it, you can set up views filters to use these, which we thought were quite nice. And yeah, this design system is being built upon as used in each project. So if a new component is needed, it can be added to the system and just evolves as it goes. And yeah, I talked to PDH at the end of the project when we were first involved to see if I could open source a fork of the theme, which hasn't been done yet, but I have been granted an okay on that. And I'm looking forward to sharing a Bootstrap theme that covers a lot of range and has the version of being non-opinionated, not of we're not opinionated, therefore you have to do it, but it's not opinionated, therefore you should be able to do it however you tried, to a degree. And yeah, looking forward to sharing that once we've, I guess, generalized it to not be PDH specific. So yeah, any questions? Okay, so the question, if I understood it, was it was quite long. Could you paraphrase it just so I could repeat it easily? How do we handle maintenance? Okay. Yeah, where there's multiple sources to create the design system. So maintenance, like we have we worked closely with the PDH team. They have internal developers as well. So they maintain the NPM library. And then they have other developers as well that are working on Drupal sites and things. Basically, anyone involved working on it has some maintenance that they can be involved in. But for the most part, we tried to bring things in and make them stable for the system rather than necessarily relying on things that will update and change. So that way, let's say a module that might have, provided initially some useful things, changes and gets out of date or whatever, we've actually just got a stable, set of Twig files we've taken from that instead of maybe using the module in a lot of cases. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases we unmodularized it. We're like, this module is basically delivering templates, so let's take the templates. And like, we don't need, modules in a lot of cases where it's just essentially giving you templates. And if it's just giving you some config when you install it, we don't really need that either. We can just put that config in the demo site so someone can see how they could recreate it. So we basically took config from installs in the modules and, any CSS and, well, there wasn't really any CSS in them, but yeah, took what we needed from the projects that made sense and fit it to this to make it have less moving parts, essentially. Yeah, so I suppose ideally, as Bootstrap versions release, we would keep up with that and apply any changes as needed. There's not usually too much work needed between sort of Bootstrap versions, and I don't imagine that'll be a large overhead, but one that does exist and worth planning for sure. Yeah. Any other questions?
Just wondering, did you use the aspect, or did you just develop just pure?
Cool. So the question was, did we use Next.js for Drupal or is it pure Next.js? So yes, it's driven by Drupal. So there's a Drupal backend site for the Next.js dashboards that I showed, at least, as far as I'm aware. Those portals and dashboards were created by the PDH team using the design system that we put together. But yeah, they're delivered via Drupal over, I believe, the JSON API to Next.js. Yep.
We did use the Drupal Next module.
Oh, fantastic. So this is Stan from PDH right here. And as he said, I'll just repeat that. They used the Drupal Next.js module. So yeah, there we go. Hope that answers that well. Cool. Anything else? It looks like we've only got a couple of minutes.
I have one question. Like, do you have any automation from Figma to the Drupal side, and how did you achieve?
Yeah. So we did initially set up on a couple of components some Storybook to Figma integration. You can embed Figma elements within a Storybook. But we found given the time constraints we had and the payoff of individually embedding each of these things versus just having them open on the screen at the same time, didn't end up winning out. But it is there to be able to be, we've demonstrated that it's doable. We've applied it on a couple of them, and basically that enables, proof of concept to roll that out over time into the full system, so that the Storybook and the Figma are more closely tied together.
So basically, you build the components first in Storybook and then sync to the Figma.
Yeah, so they don't really. So the question was do we build the components in Figma? In Storybook and then sync to Figma? So we did it the other way around. So we were bringing Figma components into Storybook, so that you can see the comparison within the Storybook, because the Storybook should be the documentation source of truth for anyone who's not actively doing design work on the system. And so that's where you want to have the comparison sit.
So how the Figma variables ended up in Drupal themes?
Sorry, can you say that again?
The Figma variables and themes. If you are using any Figma variables or anything in Figma design side, so how did they end up in the Drupal theme side for the?
So the question is essentially how do we bring over any variables from Figma through to the Drupal side? But we solved that by using Bootstrap. So the idea there is that any variables used are just Bootstrap variables and implemented via the DOM layer, and you don't really need to synchronize anything there.
No other questions?
Cool. Thanks, everybody.